My first year of brokerage, I made 8 grand. My second year, I made 50 grand. My third year, I've made over 10 times.
Was there a part of you that said, okay, maybe I'm making a mistake?
Everybody that was close to me was like, you really think you could do this? Yes, I absolutely can do this. And then COVID happens. It kind of disrupted the world. Stay up, till 3 in the morning, just studying the market and figuring out all the terminology. I'm not thinking about the failure that could be on the other side of, which I think a lot of brokers have to have. I've started this and I'm not going to quit. Almost out of my ego is going to be just crushed if I quit.
You have a lot of experience in this field. You worked on over 500 million in dealership-related sale-leasebacks. What do you think most people misunderstand about this particular strategy?
The dealership space is super unique. That's part of the reason why there's not that many brokers in it, is because
Welcome to another episode of the Dealmakers Chronicles. Today we're joined by Ned Hennessey, Vice President of Investments at Surmount. Welcome to the show, Ned.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming on. We were looking forward to hearing all about this specific niche in real estate, which a lot of people may not know about.
So, Ned, walk us through your path to getting into real estate. What was your first intention? When did you first start thinking, okay, real estate is a possible career path for me? Like, walk us to the beginning.
So I studied finance in college. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I think, maybe thought about, investment banking or, I grew up in Charlotte and went to school in Charlotte, played lacrosse in college. And, there's a lot of a lot of banks obviously headquartered there. B of A, Wells, Truist, Ally is a big, which is actually pretty prominent also in the auto sector. It has a big presence at in sort of affiliation with Queens. But in your college, I think it's like you're taking classes and you're trying to figure out a direction. And I never really thought about real estate, but my family, was in real estate, real estate development, and extended family, that is. My dad is a litigator in Charlotte, and does a lot of work with construction and real estate and contracts. And a family friend. Well, I'll backtrack. I decided, okay, look, real estate is something I want to get into. So I made a list. I think I had, some connections at like CB and these other firms, local brokerage firms and development firms. And so I made a list of about 100 people that I either kind of knew and 100, it may have been 80, but something along those lines of people that were in real estate that I thought maybe I would want to connect with, some that I knew, moderately well, some I had never talked to, and I just called them, when I was in college. And I think, maybe 20 of them, got back to me, and, get coffee and say, hey, like, I don't know anything about real estate, candidly, but I'm studying finance, and I'm willing to, learn, right? I'm willing to do, I work for free effectively. And I, that eventually pivoted into an unpaid internship with a local brokerage firm in Charlotte. Sort of along that same timeline, I decided to get my brokerage license. Again, not really knowing what being a broker meant, but I knew that was like sort of a next step. It was kind of preliminary to being formally, licensed into being able to transact in the real estate space. So, did that internship, learned how to use CoStar for the first time. I remember that, kind of like canvassed, different, properties in Charlotte. Again, I wouldn't say like I learned it, was ready to hit the street after that internship, but I knew a lot more. Starting from, blank slate, I knew a lot more, and I think I built some confidence. Hey, called all these people. I was kind of starting the brokerage path at when I started calling all those people in Charlotte without knowing it, then, starting an internship with a brokerage. And I get very, into things. When I'm doing something, I'm very, I'm intensely doing it. I kind of, hone in, and I'm never really doing anything halfway. And that can be good and bad, obviously. But that's how I kind of took up brokerage and just called everybody that I knew and tried to absorb all the knowledge I could from the brokers in the local market. And I ended up getting introduced sort of through a family friend to the first brokerage shop that I was with that had an office in Charlotte, and just kind of started from there. Right after I graduated college, which was right when COVID happened, so that was great. But just I think I have a good personality for brokerage, just because it's really eat what you kill. You have to kind of figure it out, and I think a lot of people like a little bit more structure or this and that. I think I sometimes more of the opposite. I like to have autonomy to go out and sink or swim. And I think it's a lot like sports. There's a gratification aspect of working really 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 hard, practicing, watching film, working out, for an opportunity to then go out and try to win, right? Whether it's pitching a client or kind of all aspects of the business that turn into success being a broker. But I love it. I mean, I really do enjoy what I do, and I'm very lucky to have stumbled into this and stuck with it ever since. And I think it's something I'll do forever.
Yeah. So what year did you graduate college?
2019.
2019. So as you're graduating, you have a decision to either get a job somewhere or to go commission only.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I know with a commission only, there is no ceiling. You have all that, but I'm sure, was there a part of you that said, okay, maybe I'm making a mistake.
I
Maybe I don't
mean,
need to get a salary.
yeah, I think yes. I mean, my first year in brokerage, I probably made like 8 grand. I made probably like 50 grand my second year. My third year, I made over 10 times what I made my second year. Um, and I think I'll like everybody that was close to me was like, do you really think you could do this? And I'm very stubborn. Yes, I absolutely think I can do this. And you plant so many seeds. I mean, brokerage is a seed planting business. COVID happened, so it kind of disrupted the world, right? And I was just said, all right, I'll just sit here and kind of as everybody else sat there in isolation and work on this craft, right? So it's maybe it was sort of advantageous that the world was kind of slowed down at that point, so I didn't have to move and as dynamically throughout my life, and I had the ability to just kind of hunker down and really focus on this. But yeah, I mean, certainly there's when I think any broker's career, like they start out and unless you're working under a team, right, and kind of trickling down from that pipeline. I mean, I started completely fresh, not knowing, anything. But like as I said, I mean, I just, so hungry, and would stay up, I mean, till like, 3 in the morning, just studying, the market and studying the players and studying, the movements, of different, institutions and buyers and, figuring out all the terminology, right, that that I didn't know, and then figuring out, what does that actually mean, right? You learn something, a word or a term, but it's what does that actually mean, and how do I implement that, and how does this all correlate to this, and how does real estate, react to the different, macro shifts in the markets, and it was just fascinating to me. So I mean, it was, I mean, looking back, I'm sure like. I don't ever really think I mean, I'm sure there are moments where it was, there was doubt, but it was just like, I'm just going to keep going. I was just, it was enjoyable, and I couldn't get enough of it. So, I'm glad I didn't quit.
It's interesting you mentioned that when you reached out to those 80 people, 20, got back to you, you met with them. That's already, like you say, it was already the beginning of the journey of a broker where
Right.
you do the cold reach out, only a small percentage actually responds to you. Where'd you get that personality where, you're able to reach out, cold call, whatever the case may be, and not and be able to continue with that small percentage of people actually getting back to you and it progressing? Because not everybody can do that.
I think I've been that way. I think if you ask my parents, my mother is extremely gregarious. I mean, she's just lights up a room. Knows we'll go and talk to everybody. A big personality, very big personality. My dad is excellent socially, but I think he would agree that, I think ever since I was a little kid, I was walking up to, everybody in his office and introducing myself and what are you working on, and just, I think it's just kind of a natural, way that I am. And, I think it's kind of a stubbornness too. Like I'm not thinking about the failure that could be on the other side of, any of this. It's just, you know, which I think a lot of brokers have to have, right? It's, because a lot of, maybe it's like I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of what we do as brokers, a lot of people I call, a lot of the deals we pitch, there's a tremendous amount of fear that could be associated on the other side of this, right? Of like, taking on $100 million deal or $200 million deal or whatever and like failing. Like you just can't think that way, right? And you have to be able to sort of compartmentalize what's in your control and what's out of your control. And yeah, I don't know. I think maybe I'm just lucky to not have that, rational fear of failure, legitimately. And I love talking to people, and I have no fear. I mean, my first, a couple weeks in brokerage, I think I picked out all the biggest REITs and said, introduced myself, said, I'm Ned Hennessey. I'm working on this. I think we're going to do a lot of work together in the future. I mean, just because, and they were probably like, look at this guy. And that's the case now. And it wasn't out of like, cockiness or any of that. It was just, I knew that these guys were the guys doing all the deals, and I wanted to introduce myself so that when I finally did, come up with an opportunity, we had already established ourselves. And, I think brokers can be really simple. I think it's, there's obviously fundamental aspects of like underwriting deals and knowing the market and knowing, the different statistics and all that. But a lot of it is just being personable and having relationships. I think if like you can have relationships, all the other things will, you can figure out. Having the relationship and being able to talk to people and being able to, be personable. That's it. I think. I mean, that's definitely my weapon of choice. And I would say it's what I'm best at. I have a very, I have a shorter attention span than most. So I don't love to sit behind an Excel sheet all day. I prefer to be out, um, talking to people, and that's stimulating to me.
Yeah, and hearing you speak, I'm like picking up on some cues, and I'm getting the impression that you were always, like you said, confident that you'll succeed, and like failure wasn't an option. And I remember, I think it's
Or just stubborn. I don't know. Whatever.
no, I think it's a certain character trait. And the more I do business, the more we have these conversations, the more I'm starting to believe that these traits are genetic. So it's not easy to get your kind of mental state without going through, to hell and back, emotionally, mentally. So it is a gene that you're born with. And I recall a quote by, not a quote, something Sam Altman said. He's like, when I started to meet all these ultra successful people, like Elon Musk and the rest, he's like, they were so confident that they'll succeed almost to the point of delusionality.
You have
And
to
he's
be
like, that,
delusional.
you have to
Yeah,
be,
totally.
yeah, that's what
Yeah.
engineers, they don't really succeed. They're
Well,
brilliant, they're
this is what I'm
smart.
going to do. Like, this is what I'm
Yeah.
going to do. This is what I'm going to do, right? Like, I'm not going to, I'm committed to this. This is what I'm going to do. If it takes, 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, like I've started this and I'm not going to quit. Almost out of like, it's too, my ego is going to be just crushed if I quit, but also, it's a snowball, right? You in brokerage or anything in sports and life, you start to build, and you build brick by brick, and you can see kind of what's at the end of the tunnel. That's, you never get to the end of the tunnel, and that's kind of the fun part about it. But like you can see yourself progressing, right? And you don't want to look back and be like, I waste all of that progression. I'm this much closer to where I said I was going to be or where I wanted to be, and that goal always gets farther and farther and farther. And that's why I think it's so addicting, to progress, especially at something like a brokerage. But yeah, I mean, I think you have a lot of pride, like in what you're doing. And then, it's just, I'm going to figure this out, and I have the ability to figure this out. And it's not, I don't have to build rockets, right? I get to go out and be a commercial real estate broker, which does not take, quantitative, analysis and, have to know quantum physics and rocket science. But, yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't think.
Now that you mentioned you're always chasing, I just, can't help but wonder, are you ever content? Are you happy with where you are, or is it you hit a milestone, you're like, okay, like past it, next milestone?
I don't think like I've ever set milestones like, commissions or things like that. I've just always wanted to continue to grow this business. I think I was given an opportunity, or I, found myself an opportunity to do something very niche in this business. Niche product, and I've always, maybe it's because I've just, I'm moving, at my own speed, been given autonomy ever really since I started in the business to kind of build this thing. And it's nowhere close to where I want it to be. And um, I think that's a really good question. Being content, or at least being happy, at peace, right, with where you are, and still having that hunger. And I think that's like a really, that's a philosophical battle I think brokers have, or anyone in entrepreneurship has, because there is a way to have those things parallel to one another, but it is hard, right? Because you kind of use that insatiable hunger to drive you to the next thing, but you also don't want to like be miserable in your path towards success. So I think that's something I'm trying to figure out. I don't think I'm certainly not miserable. I love this, but I think in perpetuity, or when I now until I die, you have to blend in life, right? Time with your friends and family, and if you get all of your fix from work, your life will be very shallow, I think. And I think, but at the same time, you're like, I don't want to take too much time away from work, because it's like, it's all on you, right? Everything all of your success is dependent on your work. And there's a lot of like, factors out of your control that, you could have 10 really great deals that you think are going to line up and sell, and they could all, crash and burn. And then, what are you left with? And it's kind of battling that fear of, uncontrollable failure with. But I think that's something you just have to figure out. I'm certainly, figuring it out. It's probably something everybody has to figure out, along the way. But you don't want to, you can't, it's yin and yang, right? You can't be all in one side or all in the other, or you'll not have any success in the business, or you'll be completely unhappy, right? You have to find some balance, and you have to just be content with that balance. I think that's where you find the contentness. That's my opinion.
Tell us more about the niche that you're in, right? One of the things that, initially when speaking to you, like this niche of being an automotive real estate is not something that's widely known or covered, but you found it, you love it, and you made it very successful. So tell us, that connection with that industry.
Yeah, I've always loved cars. I could not work on the engine of a car to save my life, but I've always loved cars and watches, since I was kind of little. And
Yeah, I saw you wearing an Aquanaut, and I'm like, okay, this man is a man of class.
uh,
I respect
yeah,
a man who wears an Aquanaut.
thank you. I love this watch. It's a nice one. Our COO Nico has a nice one, and a different face and band, and I'm more of a silver guy, so cars. Yeah, I mean cars I've always liked. I've been fascinated by them, just, kind of the way they're built. I knew every 0 to 60, and all of these, the prices of these cars, and they kind of become a piece of art, right? After a certain level, you get to a certain level of car, and everything else after that, it's like, this isn't, this isn't a daily driver. It is more of a collectible. And so, I mean, I'm sure there was that component to it. The guy that gave me a shot in the business, my first firm, who I'm really grateful to, he had some experience in the dealership space prior to sort of focusing on his industrial niche. And I said, look, I don't want to come in and do what everybody else is doing, because I think that it's just I wanted something a little bit more green, and I don't think I realized how hard it was going to be to do something that was not only green for brokers in our office, but really green for the industry. So I mean, it took like educating institutional capital partners, REITs, funds, to really educating, and like the clients themselves that were not. They're not, there's a whole layer of education before you can even talk about doing a deal, right? And you have to, convince and build trust and educate on this concept of underwriting and collateralizing your real estate to your business, and then allowing me to sell it. And you've never met me before, right? And all of this. And I think that was really hard, but I think, again, stubbornly, I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to figure this out. And, I would be lying if I said, it doesn't take a little bit of luck, or like a good break along the way. And So I, said, why don't you focus on dealerships? So I focused on dealerships, and sort of canvas dealerships around, the Charlotte market, North Carolina, called people. And I think too, beyond just, starting with the niche of dealerships, I was fascinated by the sale-leaseback very early on in my career, like not having sold a tremendous amount of real estate, sold, a couple dozen deals, just, regular net lease deals. But I was really fascinated by the sale-leaseback because it takes sort of a more intricate, it's a little bit more of a sophisticated approach. I mean, you're kind of investment, it's a little bit more of an investment banking approach to real estate. You underwrite credit, you underwrite, unit level performance, you collateralize that to a piece of real estate, you sell it, sort of as an annuity to an investor. And I was like, that's cool. I like that. It stimulated me, I think, a little bit more. It made me excited, I think, a little bit more than just, selling, investment properties for, private investors or developers. And so I really challenged myself. I really took on like the Goliath of an assignment, as someone with no experience, in the sale-leaseback space or the dealership space, and said, I'm going to go do both at the same time, which is probably absolutely insane. I got into the dealership space through a couple of new car dealership assignments, all of which were like 50 or 100 or $200 million deals. Those were like the first deals I threw myself into. I mean, that just shows you how insane I am. And I convinced, and I won the trust of these clients, underwrote them. I didn't know how to, underwrite. I mean, I knew how to underwrite, but I didn't know how to package things to the really to the degree of that, institutional REITs, how they looked at deals, how they underwrote, everything. And so what I did was I found the deal and I actually kind of worked it backwards. I brought it to an institutional REIT and I said, I have this deal, but I need you to help me back into it in the underwriting that you would do it internally. And so they actually, it was sort of a reverse. Rather than me underwriting and bringing it to them, um, um, they showed me kind of how to back into underwrite. Like, I wasn't like, I have no idea how to underwrite this deal. And, it's, I've all these, fundamental aspects. I had what I needed to have, but I didn't know how to package it in that way. And I was like, this is a real opportunity to learn, get a PhD in this process that I can then go replicate over and over again. I'll be that much further ahead in this asset class. So, one of the biggest REITs in the country, the world, showed me really how to fundamentally underwrite to that, institutional level, because I had, this really, juicy deal, which is totally backwards, but it was like, this is, that's how I learned how to do it. And, and so that deal ended up, trading, outside of my involvement, after a lot of work, but it was really a blessing because I knew, I was on the scene. I had the attention of, a ton of really big institutions. And I knew how to underwrite and package these deals now. And so I knew how to take this thing that, wasn't necessarily successful in terms of closing, but I knew exactly how to then, package these deals, underwrite them, and then replicate this process. And so, that's what I did. I went and I actually started, in the used car space. There's a buy here, pay here, group. And, I knew that a lot of the buy here, pay here group, had, new car franchise as well. It's sort of an ancillary business to a lot of these guys. And so I got, into that network, and then, after closing a few deals and becoming, trusted advisor to a lot of those guys, was referred to a huge dealership group, in the Midwest. And we sold their portfolio a few months after for about $100 million to a REIT, replicating that process that I had with the the group, the original group, that I kind of, brought out. So that's how it all started. I mean, it was not like, here's my plan and here's, I'm going to go execute on this plan. It was just figuring out a little bit along the way and kind of building the path, right? As I was going, right? As if I needed to, advance, 5 more feet, I had to build the path, 5 more feet. And, I think that's a really cool way to learn. I think everyone has, thinks they have a plan and thinks that, everything's going to go to plan and everything's going to follow this, path. And I don't think it ever really works out that way. And I think, everyone's just kind of trying to figure it out. Nobody really knows anything. I mean, you got to know something, but Nobody has it all figured out. And, it was like, all right, like, what do I have to lose? And it wasn't, at, at every point along the way, there was a tremendous amount of work and expertise and confidence. And, I was trying to do everything the right way, so that, because your clients are trusting in you to get these things done. And again, luckily, everything sort of worked out the way that it was supposed to. That could have happened very differently, I think, but it didn't. For whatever reason, I think I put myself in a lot of the good, the right places, and sure, with some luck, the market was really good in 21, 22, so that helped a lot. And so that was it. I mean, that was really like the catapult onto the scene. Selling $100 million portfolio, not very early. I mean, not very late into my career. And getting every institution in the country involved and selling it at, like, the lowest cap rate a dealership had traded. Like, I think, really, I don't know of a portfolio that's traded at a lower cap rate than that since. So, and again, the market was a factor, but that's how that all started. And I think it's kind of a cool story.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like you have a lot of experience in this field. You worked on over $500 million, 500 million in dealership related sale leasebacks. What do you think most people misunderstand about this particular strategy?
I think that it's twofold. I think that there's I think it's very specific to the dealership space. I mean, our firm, Surmount, has done, $40 billion worth of transactional work, a lot of that with sale leasebacks across, different asset classes, restaurants, car washes, C-store, collision, industrial assets. I think the dealership space is super unique. And I think that's part of the reason why there's not that many brokers in it, is because there's a huge moat, I think, that exists in terms of trust and, understanding how this business works. And I think there's a lot of pride, maybe call it ego, in the real estate of a lot of these, for a lot of these operators. I think for a long time, they were taught to own the real estate. It was sort of an annuity. It was an insurance policy. If the business failed, you still had real estate that had value. And I think, also there was a few, one or two funds that did, all of the sale leasebacks in the dealership space, for the last, 20 years. I mean, aside from me and, a few other brokers doing sale leasebacks in the space, there's not that much involvement. And so what happened was these dealers would go to this single fund, or these few funds, and they would get these terms dictated to them, which we've now reviewed dozens of these leases that for deals we haven't been a part of, and they're not good. I mean, they're like filled with covenants and really strict assignment change of control rights, really strict. There's like fees to assign a deal, percentage of the sale price, which is like, that's not market. And so what happened was, I think a lot of the dealership space thought this is what sale leaseback means, right? I sell my real estate at a time when I need growth capital, or I need to, recapitalize my balance sheet, or whatever, right? All the different uses, that a sale leaseback can yield. And 5-10 years down the road, they realize, hey, I signed a really bad contract, right? And then, because all of the, that was really the only, player doing these deals, sale leaseback became synonymous with these deals that were not so good. And so I think that's a lot of the reason why I think there's not as much, brokerage within the space. I think, I mean, there were a lot of sale leasebacks being done. It's definitely not as like a commodity as, car wash or C-store, restaurants. I mean, those are smaller price points. It's much easier for retail investors to get into that space because you're not paying, 10, 15, 20, $50 million for a single asset. It's much more of an institutional market, I think, in terms of the capital. And so I think it's all those factors. I think, you really have to make and again, it's not for everybody, right? I think it's building trust, really saying, okay, we can structure these deals, if it makes sense for you, in a way that the contract's good. You're going to have, very flexible assignment, change of control language, so that you are not constrained down the line if you want to sell your business. It doesn't hurt your business value or your ability to sell down the road. There's not going to be covenants or personal guarantees. And there's some other nuanced language in these deals that we've mitigated through our process. And you're going to get a much more you're inherently going to get a better cap rate and proceeds amount because we're running a competitive process, and you're going to dictate that process, right? You get to dictate the process through us. Because we're running the process. You have something shiny, you have a great deal, and we're going to go bring it out to the hungriest of funds and make them compete for it. That's way different, I think, than any of these, than a lot of these dealers were used to. Just, hey, if we want sale-leaseback capital, we go to this guy. They tell us what they're going to pay, and they give us this contract. That's not a good deal. That it's never going to be a good deal. And I think it's a lot of educating that that was the case. And this is how we're trying to do things differently now.
What would you say is the cap rate that is currently being traded at versus in 2021?
That's the golden question. It depends. I think we're seeing things, down into the sixes, which we haven't seen in a long time, for really quality product. I mean, there are definitely some funds that, will get down into the sixes, for quality assets. I think most deals are trading, call it between a 7 and an 8. Most funds, institutions, anyone with debt, that has to, put debt on a piece of real estate. I mean, they kind of have to trade in the 7s, I think. So, I mean, most deals, I would say 7 to 8. There is, tremendous interest, in the 6s, for quality assets. And I think that's because, look, there's a lot of money that was on the sidelines first half of this year. And I think there's a lot of new entrants, right? You have these big institutions starting to buy or launch net lease platforms, and this space is just growing, right? And when it grows, when more capital comes, it's got to be deployed, right? It's got to be deployed to get a return, and so they have to buy, right? And I think it's also a mixture of the fact that there's not a ton of quality institutional sized deals on the market. When you put a dealership, 5 dealerships together, it could be 50, 60, 70, 80, $100 million portfolio. That becomes really enticing to funds that have, billions of dollars to deploy because they're trying to get it out as quickly as possible, right? They have to hit this into your deadline, especially if you're a public fund, in order for their investors to get a return, right, on the cash flows from those investments. So, that's the golden question. I think it really depends. I mean, there's deals that trade above an 8. There's deals that trade sub 7. You're talking about a 200 basis point window there. I think most deals trade 7 to 8, with, relatively, quality fundamentals. But there's, for the really, really, really primo, call it, investment grade, investment grade sort of adjacent. You've got, interest in the 6s for sure. I don't know how long that's going to last, but
Yeah, for the REITs or the investors that are buying this land, do they ever put contingencies on the business? Like, do they ever file a UCC on the business in case the business fails? Because I would think with transactions like this, if I buy a triple net lease property and I can get, if this tenant fails, I can get somebody else in. But with dealership, it's so particular where we think if somebody fails, it may not be the easiest route to get somebody else in. Is there any kind of protection covenants for the buyers?
that's actually the opposite with dealerships. If and I'll say this, so, and this is not a very known thing, and maybe I'm giving out some secret sauce, but so in the dealership space, you actually have a bit of a manufacturer protection, similar to top franchises and franchise systems. And this is especially true if you're in a main corridor, right? And I think it's especially true, if you are a more high performing dealership. But I mean, so the manufacturer has typically has a clause in the in the dealer agreement, and it's sometimes evident on the title of the real estate that if that dealership fails, and because that manufacturer does not want to give up that territory to a competing manufacturer, they will come in and either guarantee that lease for a portion of time or indefinitely, and or backfill it with an operator that they deem to be successful because they obviously have a heavy dependency on the success of that operator to be able to sell their product, right? And so that happens very often, and that's I wouldn't say it is a 100% guarantee every time. I mean, if you're a very rural dealership that maybe is kind of in the middle in terms of profitability and volume, and the market's kind of moving towards more of a metro. Maybe the manufacturer says we can do without this one, but if you're in a secondary or primary market, and you're surrounded by other manufacturer dealerships selling other manufacturer product, there's a very high likelihood that they would come in and say, hey, we're not going to give up this territory to this other manufacturer, because that'll actually it'll create a market that now does not have it is now their product's non-existent within that market, and it's actually it would be even harder for them to come back in right at that point. And so that's what you see a lot of times with dealerships, at least franchise automotive. I mean, we work on franchise automotive dealerships, equipment, heavy truck, some stuff in the RV and power sports space as well, but kind of limited to dealerships. But you see that. So I mean, I think there is a very in added kind of layer of credit almost from the manufacturer usually.
When speaking to the owners, operators, right, of the dealerships who actually own the land, and you're convincing them to sell the asset and then take out that bulk payment. For example, we have a close friend of ours. He owns a couple of dealerships in New Jersey, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, in New Jersey they no longer allow for new dealership land real estate, right? So whatever dealerships are out there, you can only replace them, right? For those owners who own that land, how hard is it to convince them, okay, sell it, lease it back, you get that lump sum, with real estate being such a prime commodity?
I think there's definitely development potential still in New Jersey. I'm sure it may be limited compared to other markets, like Texas or Florida, big kind of growing California, markets. I think there's obviously a premium for that real estate because it's a supply demand, equation. We've got several clients. We're part of the Greater New York Auto Dealers Association. So that includes a lot of New Jersey dealers. We have relationships with a lot of dealers in New Jersey, or groups that are, East Coast and have, a presence in New Jersey. It's not been, something that, we've like necessarily come into, because again, a sale leaseback is not, the intent of a sale leaseback. And again, we're never, kind of pushing sale leasebacks like this is the best thing for you. This is the only thing, right? This is a tool that may work for you, and it may be really accretive and a really, strategic lever. But let's go find out, right? Let's go find out
Right.
where the market value is. Let's go figure out what, you want to do, right, with the capital and what your plan is. It's not just, hey, let's go sell lease back and get all this capital and you can figure out what to do with it after. That's never our plan. But I think, in terms of the New Jersey market, again, it's in that sort of dynamic that you described. I think look, I mean, if you're doing a sell lease back in a regardless of the market, I think you would have to think a little bit more maybe about New Jersey market, because you say, okay, it's a finite amount of real estate, but taking that ideology, you've got probably a premium on that real estate if you're going to be there anyway for a long term, because you can't move, because you can't go develop another dealership. You're going to be there for a long time anyway. So create some liquidity maybe in your real estate, and go out and grow with it. Maybe it's hard to grow in the New Jersey market. Maybe you grow in an adjacent market, but it's not something that we've, had any sort of issues like that with. But again, it's not, I am never saying this is the absolute best thing you should do, right? Especially in the first half of the relationship, this is, here's what we've done. Here's what we do better than anybody in the country. Here's the benefits of what this can do for you. Maybe let's see if there's what a deal would look like. Let's determine interest. Let's determine what the capital could be used for after, and that's how we do things. We want to build relationships. Our firm does not want to just sell individual deals and just be deal. It's relationships. It's literally being a partner, I think, strategic partner to our clients. And you've got to say no sometimes. You got to sometimes tell clients, hey, this doesn't make sense for you, right? You've got a really good piece of real estate. This is an investment, right? This is an investment that is actually going to grow and you should probably keep this, right? So I mean, there's that component too of what we do. It's not just, every single deal is something that, we push to happen. So I know I answered your question with like, lots of other context, but
No, it definitely makes sense what you're saying because it's very like deal specific. And if somebody will just sell their land and put $15 million in there in a checking account, that might not make sense. But if the same person wants to go out there buy two more dealerships, then their return is significantly higher than whatever cap rate equivalent they get.
yeah, or it could be like a balance sheet, you can recapitalize the balance sheet. I mean, like, here's an example. I mean, 2021, 2022, there's more M&A activity in the dealership space than ever. I think that's across every single dealership vertical. Most of those deals had debt put on them. Most of that debt is coming due next year and the year after. Most of that debt was put on at very high LTVs because banks couldn't, get enough money out the door. That are now about, the LTVs and the valuations at that time the valuations are much less now on those businesses. And so the the debt is about equivalent, or very close to the equivalent of the business value. So getting, refining all of that debt, based on leverage ratios is going to be very tough. So there's going to be a gap there, an equity gap that's going to need to be filled. The rates are also, double, right? So your cost of capital is going to be a lot more and your profitability is less. And so you're in a real squeeze. And, I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of sale-leaseback activity to, help sort of fill that gap next year or the year after. But that's like another thing, right? I mean, you take your real estate capital, you go grow with it, right? A dollar in the business, in the dealership business returns 20, 30%. Dollar in the real estate may appreciate 6%. That's simple math. And, if you can establish that while creating really, long-term control, and really, you're not owning it anymore, but you can control it. I mean, you're leasehold, you have leasehold ownership of this asset. And, the idea is not to, relinquish control. It is to, maintain as much control as possible while, maintaining and maximizing that, equity and liquidity within the real estate. So
How long is a typical lease on a sale and lease back on a dealership?
15 or 20 years. I think the market, wants 15 or 20 years. The cap rates we're talking about, 6.5, 7, 7.5, 8. I mean, you do the math, right? And, you're going to need at least 15 years of cash flow to really make that make sense. 20 years, I think, is where most of the market, would like to be. When I say the market, I mean investors, but I mean, we like to, position deals at 15 years and see, we'll call it 20-year pricing and see, where, because obviously if the client can commit to less term, and get, the added benefit of those 5 years, they don't have to commit to, that's great. But I'd say most of the market, kind of pushes back at 20, and 10 is tough. I mean, I think you can do 10-year sale-leasebacks. I think you're going to take a pricing cut. Obviously, your cap rate is going to be higher. So, I mean, you're looking at, 15, 20-year leases, typically guaranteed by the parent company or the, corporately, 2% annual increases to, as a proxy for inflation. That's market. You're looking at, a few, the option structure, I think, is typically 5 years. I think as a tenant, you want 5 years. The alternative to that would be 10 years, which is obviously more advantageous to the landlord. So, I mean, it's usually like 20-year lease, 4 or 5 year options. I mean, if a tenant wants to build in 10 5-year options after the fact, sometimes, we can do that. So they effectively have 70 years to control 5-year increments after the 20-year term, initial term. But that's how these deals look, absolute triple net leases. And then the cap rate, the cap rate and the rent. I mean, the rent is really determined by, rent coverage at the site level. And the cap rate is really determined by, rent coverage, real estate fundamentals, and then corporate credit, right? It's a gauge of risk, right? The cap rate's a return on your risk. And so, corporate credit dictates that a lot.
So we spoke about valuation quite a good amount, right? So when I'm buying, call it a dealership or any other business that's sitting on land that the dealership owns, I'm looking at it through two different lenses. I'm seeing what the business is generating. I see the EBITDA. I have a certain kind of multiple to EBITDA for the business. And then with land, I figure, okay, if this person was to sell the land, how much would this dealership be paying them? And I assess the land based on the cap rate. Now, if the dealership sells the land ahead of the sale to an independent, like another dealership that wants to acquire it, does that formula change on the multiple to EBITDA for the business? Does it increase? Does it decrease? Does it stay constant?
So let me make sure I'm asking. So are you saying the difference between the multiple and the EBITDA in a sale leaseback versus just a regular sale of real estate and business?
Correct. Yeah. So if
So
I'm a dealership and I have no land to my name and I'm just selling my business, as opposed to I have land to my name and I have the business, does the EBITDA change for the business value?
the EBITDA does change. I mean, if the rent, well, I mean, if the EBITDA, typically, so you're doing this. So typically, you're selling. Typically, dealership has, opco. So if they own it in this scenario one, if they own the real estate, they own the business. They probably have an opco, and they probably have a propco. They're probably paying themselves some sort of rent. When you underwrite a dealership EBITDA, and dealerships actually trade on EBT, not EBITDA, for whatever reason. And so, a decrease in net income would be, that rent that the dealership's paying themselves. And when we underwrite these deals and we see, packages and we're involved in M&A activity, there is a rent there. There is a line item for rent, because that's, there's going to be a rent from the dealership regardless, whether it's a sale leaseback rent or it's a rent paid to self. The only way I would say that the actual EBIT number would be less, in a sale leaseback scenario would be if the rent, was more. And sometimes, you do push rent more, to generate a higher sale leaseback amount. But here's what I'll say. Sale leasebacks are almost always accretive, almost always accretive in this space, because in the dealership, selling a dealership business, you trade on a multiple of EBIT, and that multiple is typically anywhere from 2 to 3 times to 10 times. It almost never exceeds 10 times, and that means if you can sell, if you can trade rent, right? If you can trade rent, and put a multiple on rent that is higher than the multiple on the business, then you're creating an accretive excess value. So say I've got business that has $5 million of EBIT, and I'm trading at 5x, or 6x or 8x, and let's say 8x, $5 million at 8x, $40 million. Every million I put of rent, and if I could trade at a 7 cap at least, or an 8 cap or a 6 cap, you're putting 7 caps roughly 14x, right, on rent. So if I can trade my rent at 14x and my business trades at 8x, every $1 million of rent that decreases my EBITDA makes me $6 million extra in sale leaseback value. So I mean, as long as you can trade at a higher rent multiple, as long as your cap rate is 7, 8, 8.5, you're going to make more money doing a sell leaseback and then selling the business than you would just selling the real estate and the business together, because that multiple is higher than you'd be able to sell the EBITDA for. So, and then you have to look at, okay, there's factors like selling the business and real estate versus, sale leaseback in the real estate and what kind of market exists. And I think we found that if it's a really quality dealership that is, highly desirable in terms of its operating capacity and its profitability, it doesn't matter that it's on a lease. I mean, there are certain buyers obviously that, want, to own the real estate, but if it's a really quality deal operationally and the lease is good, there's no reason to not buy that dealership, right? If you have, a well-written lease that you can assume, and long, a good enough amount of term, right? Or maybe restructure the lease at the time of the M&A. But that's kind of how we look at it, and I think how private equity looks at it, and how a lot of sophisticated, more financially minded operators look at it. but it's, some prefer to own the real estate. Some, have no issue just assuming the real estate or, executing a sale leaseback and selling the business and kind of, having your cake and eat it too on both sides.
In terms of motivation, right, for the operators with the land to be selling, what do you see more now? Is it more recapitalization of paying down the debt, or is it funds that I'm going to use for M&A, or is it something completely different?
I think it's like there's probably, I'll go down from like I think highest use to lowest, but there's kind of 4 or 5 different catalysts for why sale leaseback makes sense. The first is growth capital. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of capital tied up in the real estate. You can only, you're either going to have to use retained earnings, right, which is a slow pool of accumulated capital to grow. You're going to have to go get debt, which taps out, right? You can only get so much debt. And then, or you're going to have to sell a piece of your business, right, to private equity or an outside investor, get some cash, and now somebody else has a piece of your operational pie, which I think, most operators care a lot more about than their the real estate pie. And so that's it, growth capital, whether, you want to war chest cash from your own real estate and go out and grow, whether you want to do that and or do it, simultaneous to M&A. Hey, I'm going to go buy 10 dealerships. The real estate's worth 100 million. We can sell leaseback it for 140 million. You can use that, 40 million, post tax to pay down your acquisition multiple in the business. It's, that's a sweet deal when you look at returns that can generate. And or development, right? I've got a development project. It's going to be really capital intensive. The construction financing is high rate. I'm going to have to put a lot of capital into this. Why don't I just do like a reverse sale leaseback where somebody builds it at 100% cost, and I will assume a lease, right, once it's complete, and I will retain much more of my own cash to then have flexibility to go make M&A or working capital or whatever, optimize my business. So that's one. I think that's the main. Second, I think is balance sheet recapitalization. A lot of groups are over levered or their business performance has dropped and they're starting to hit covenants or tripping. They're getting close to like the red zone here with their debt, and that's not good. And so they need to create some space between their debt and accumulate more equity, and so that they can either just get the bank off them or be able to put on more debt down the road. Either way. So that's 2. 3, I think, is we see partnership buyouts. Siblings, parents, trading to siblings or brothers or just business partners or things of that nature. We see somebody wants to get out, somebody wants to stay in. Use the real estate to create liquidity to buy the other one out without having to sell a portion of the business, right, or having to sell the business as a whole. And then diversification and sort of estate planning, right? Like if someone feels very, very kind of concentrated into the business and real estate, they can take real estate equity and then go create a family office or diversify into other businesses or diversify 1031 that into a diversified portfolio of real estate, right, and kind of estate plan with that and defer tax and depreciation. That's a good way to do it, right? Just go ahead and take that real estate equity and diversify it into very fungible, Main Street real estate across different asset classes, and then maybe put that in a trust for the next generation, and then sell the business later. But do it, while you have flexibility, while you're not under the gun to sell the business and the real estate. So that's another thing. And there are other reasons, I'm sure, but those are kind of the main ones.
Tell us about a time that a deal almost didn't go through and you were able to at the finish line piece it together and actually push it through.
Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, a lot of times I think that comes down to the lease. A lot of times, you structure these deals, you get all the monetary terms, set, through an LOI process, and then you pick a horse, right? And you just can't figure out a lease that's going to work, right, for the tenant and for the landlord, because there are, some fundamentals and some things, and everybody wants their cake and eat it too when you're in those scenarios. And I think I mean, I can think of like several that kind of fall under this. And I think, we do a really good job of timing the market, whether it's a group that has to, fund that has to meet, allocation deadlines and, or, understanding, having so much experience in this space to where we understand, what a lease looks like from one group versus, 10 others and who's going to be more strenuous here and or who's going to have a more institutional lease. And I think we do a really good job of that, but sometimes, you still kind of find yourself in a situation, a stalemate, per se, where, somebody just says, look, I'm not doing this deal, right? You get to the finish line and the last couple of lease, elements are need to be ironed out. And this kind of happened recently in a large portfolio we closed a couple weeks ago, and it's happened. It doesn't happen frequently, but it happens, especially when you're doing a deal with a client. I think for the first time, we have a tremendous team here that has a ton of experience. I can't say this about any other firm I've been with. I've great appreciation to every place I've been before Surmount. But nobody operates the way that we do. Nobody has, the experience, and I think the pull. We've done, $40 billion worth of work. We do about 5 or 6 billion a year. We drive the market, right? And a lot of the institutions depend on us to fill their buckets, and so that carries a heavy weight. And I've seen, being able to kind of plug in and to this infrastructure and Nico and Glenn and when things go sideways, say, all right, what are we going to do here? And we huddle up and, we leverage the relationship, currency and the, just sort of the weight that we have, in this space to pull strings that I just didn't, I would have never thought that would be able to be pulled. And I'm, sitting there like this. It's, those are, I think, are really, really exciting deals because I mean, you get to that stage and you're like, I have no idea how we're going to get past this because what one person's asking for is just so far away from what I know the other person's going to agree to, and then you go back and forth for a couple of days, and all of a sudden you've got a solution and you're closing 2 days later. Those are the ones that kind of, I think you learn a lot because you have to get creative and you have to do things that aren't, necessarily orthodox, or you come up with creative, terms within a lease, that fit everybody. And now that becomes a standard, right? With that fund and that you can use with other funds. And I think those deals are cool because I think we're always trying to solve for and create, a standard and a precedent for clients, especially in those lease terms that is attractive and that gives them the maximum amount of flexibility. And I think that's really where we've gotten creative. I mean, you can only get so creative with cap rate and price, right? I mean, that's it's pretty binary, but the leases, I think we've gotten really creative with, and I've learned so much just, being with these guys and figuring out how to, move the chessboard around to the benefit of the client. And I mean, some pretty exciting stuff where you just kind of put your head down at the end of the day, and then the next day, it gets figured out and you're like, holy shit.
Mhm. So yeah, I see you have a lot of praise for Sermont, right? I believe
Yeah.
Sermont is your third commercial real estate brokerage that you've been with since you started your career. What went into that decision for you personally and professionally? What were some of the things, some of the cues that gave it away that this is the right path for me?
Yeah, absolutely. I had tremendous, pride working here and praise for this firm. I started, at a firm that is a national firm, had an office in Charlotte. Very grateful for that opportunity. I will always, remember that. Anyone that gives you a shot in the business, I think you have to be kind of eternally grateful because, you have to start somewhere, right? I wouldn't be where I am now without that opportunity. Moved to a second firm briefly in between, and that. Just didn't work out for reasons I won't say, not with me, but more with the firm and itself. I was at a time where I was really excited about my career, and I'd kind of launched, and I was ready to really hit the ground running. Had a ton of momentum behind me, and was really looking for the right place. And obviously, in and in pro, which is what we were, before, and most of the industry know us as, is, the premier firm. I mean, Glenn, is the goat of net lease brokerage by every standard, and the firm and the culture that he's built that I get to be a part of now is just tremendous. I mean, it's a being in New York too. It's just a very the standard at which we work is so it's so above, I think, everything else that I'd ever experienced. I mean, there's so much, time and effort and expertise and attention to detail. And we've got, a team of analysts and managing directors and sort of an investment bank internally that do a tremendous amount of detailed, underwriting and analysis, and very thoughtful, deep dive into deals that just, I did not have tremendous experience with before this. And you get to lean on, the expertise of, $40 billion worth of transactions over 10,000 properties. I mean, there's nothing that really hasn't been done before. And, if you need something, I work on a lot of deals with Glenn, and Nico, and get a lot of, there's a lot of, teamwork, directly with them, that is, fantastic, experience, and really lucky to have their involvement. But, I met Glenn. I was looking, at firms, and I met with Glenn, and we talked, and I learned more about the firm. And I was looking at other firms in New York and other firms around the country. I needed to find, somewhere to, get the business, back, somewhere to work, right? Somewhere to, have a shop. And I was just kind of blown away by, everything he's built and the culture, and not only what he's built, but what we're building. And I think, what we're building is even more exciting. I think there was a real opportunity to bring, my sort of focus in a niche product, align it with, the best, processes and people and, team, in the country, in that lease, and grow it to something that was actually, the best, right? That is what I set out to do when I wanted to, when I started in the business. And now I had an opportunity to, bring my expertise and track record and, this niche, product, and all the relationships that I have in the dealership space, and partner with, the best people in the business. And it was like a no-brainer. It was like, I think there's a quote, that one of the older guys in the office said. He said, "You know how to run fast, but we're going to show you how to run with good form." And I feel like that's a really good quote, because, if you run fast, you can be running all over the place. I mean, you can be running, in the wrong direction, right? It doesn't matter if you're running really fast in the wrong direction. And so you got to be able to run fast, but you got to be able to run with good form so that you can stay and you can do this for a long time and do it the right way. And I will never forget that quote. And I think that's sort of what I embody a lot more now, is running with good form and processes, and just knowing a lot more about the business so that I can take care of the clients that I have, and be the best, value add to them. But that's how I would sum it up, is running fast with good form. And that is absolutely what, kind of we embody here. And yeah, I mean, you can tell just from, the way I talk, I'm very excited to be here, and I've been here for a while, but I'm excited to be in here every day. And I love the people that I work with. I love the work that we get to do. And I love the, ability to continue to say, how are we going to get, bigger and better, and, grow this into, something massive, that is, so.
Yeah. How big is the team at Sermont?
So I think we've got like 30 or 40 brokers. We got New York office, Scottsdale office, Boston, Chicago team. We've got, some people down in Florida. So those are kind of our offices. New York is obviously our hub. We office in Midtown. We've got, an entire team of analysts, several dozen analysts and directors that manage them that, I work in conjunction with. I work with Evan Sterling. He's my partner on the dealership side. So it's us, and then, that are very client facing. I think, it's easy to think that we're doing everything. We're absolutely not. I mean, we have an excellent marketing team, an excellent events team. Again, support from, Glenn and Nico, support from, entire analyst team and directors that manage them. And it's very much a team effort. I mean, all of the things that we do are very much a team effort. I mean, again, we're client facing. We, get to put our face on a lot of things, but there's a tremendous amount of people that deserve a ton of credit for everything that we do. And, we certainly wouldn't be able to do what we do or appear, the way that we appear without that. So I think, tremendous amount of credit goes to those people, and, they do an excellent job.
You mentioned before that, when you first started, it took a lot of education and educating both the REITs, so the buy side, the sell side, and earning that trust, especially from the dealership owners, right? Walk us through how hard was it to earn their trust. Now you have a track record, right? You're at a big firm, you guys done billions in transactions. You can provide that as proof to the pudding of like, this is how it works, this is how it's done. Walk us through the initial journey of like, I don't have a track record, I've never done this before, convincing a owner operator of a dealership who's probably much older than you, who's been in the business for decades, to trust you to take you on that journey.
This is, yeah, great question. I think, replicating this in any asset class, any product, you first have to figure out what you're doing, right? What are you selling, or what are you adding in terms of value? That's the best way to put it. What value are you adding? And then you have to look in the mirror and you convince yourself of that value that you're adding. Because if you don't believe in what you're doing, have a really good understanding of the value that you're able to add, nobody else is going to see that value, right? So you first have to really understand it, fundamentally know, all right, what am I adding in terms of value, and really be confident, and I think translate that, because people are just gonna, they're gonna say this is a waste of my time. So I think you have to start there, and I think that's hard, right? Because you've never done it before, and it's easier to flex deals that you've done and have confidence, but you really, I mean, you have to be delusional, right? You have to find that thing, and you have to do it, after you've been successful, right? Because, to get to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage, it's all the same. But um, I think it started for me like super big deal process, and then getting into some smaller stuff, track record, and then selling a really big portfolio after selling lots of other net lease stuff before that. But I think I don't know what the secret sauce is to that. I think you have to know what you're doing to an extent. You have to establish yourself, kind of what, within that space. And I think sometimes it's easier to find people that are also, value add creators to the clients you want to work with, whether it's people kind of ancillary to them. I mean, I work with a tremendous amount of people in the M&A space, right? M&A brokers, accountants, attorneys, wealth managers, and if you can express value to them, unique value to them, um, they're almost a better advocate for you than yourself, right? Because they're already, adding value to the clients that you want to work with. But, at that first stage, I think it's, I don't know. I mean, you have to just be like delusional. You have to believe in what you're doing, and you're going to hear no so many times over and over and over and over and over. And you're going to think, okay, can I really do this? Right? Am I ever going to get a break? And when I get that break, am I going to get lucky enough to actually close that deal? Right? Because I don't know if I can even go through this again for another deal. And, I think you have to know what you're doing. I think you have to understand the value that you can create. And I think, again, you have to convince yourself, right, before you can convince others. And I think that's the key. And I think it starts with one. And then once you've done it once, you can show, you can do it 10 times, and then you can do it 100. But that first one is certainly the hardest. I think you hear about that in every business, every entrepreneur. That first, kind of threshold that you crosses the hardest, but is also the most, propels you forward more than any other one that you'll ever do, confidence wise internally, but also with the ability to replicate and show, actually pitch that to the additional clients you want to work with. But it's hard. I think there isn't a cheat code, right? You just have to really practice, get good at your craft, believe in yourself, believe in what you're doing, because then other people will believe in it. And then you have to execute, right? When you're given the opportunity, you better not, back away. You better go into that thing with a ton of confidence, with a ton of, hard work, and make sure that it crosses the finish line, and do a really, really, really good job for that client, because, they can then, share how good the experience was with you and the value that you added. And that's, that'll take you a long way. But I think you have to, convince yourself that's it, which is hard and maybe sounds crazy.
Yeah, so you do a lot of work like, okay, I need to convince myself I know what I'm doing, get the experience. At what point would you say that there was absolutely, I don't know if you ever had imposter syndrome in this business, but at what point did you say to yourself, I am experienced?
You always have imposter syndrome. You always, every day there's some imposter syndrome. I mean, it's not, I think it's crazy, right? To see how far like this business has come for us and me. And, I'm 20, going to be 29 in a few months. I'm not that old. And I think like anybody that's in a high level of success has imposter syndrome as they get to the next stages, just because you always want to be better than you are. And in a business like this, you deal with a tremendous amount of no and a tremendous amount of, call it failure or whatever, but failure, you fail fast, right? You fail as fast as you can so that you're quicker to that, success. And I think you really have to be resilient. And I think, call it imposter syndrome, call it, just being, kind of chipped away at by the business. If you don't feel that, you're probably doing something wrong. I would say, if you're not putting yourself in uncomfortable rooms and trying to level up and trying to, then you're probably doing something wrong. Because I'm not, afraid, every day when I walk into the office, but like, there's certainly moments where, you're just, working, things maybe don't go your way. And it's hard to see how far you've come, in the business and how much success you've had. And I'm sure it's really easy for, if you were to ask somebody else around you, like, what do you think? And they're like, dude, look at where you are. You know what I mean? Look at what's going on. But it's hard because you box yourself into these little moments, right, without seeing the big picture. And I think that's just a proponent of people wanting to be really, really good or the best at what they're doing. And it's a hard business. It'll always be a hard business because you're doing, you're eating what you kill, and there's a lot that's out of your control. But yeah, I mean, I always, was there a moment I felt imposter syndrome? I feel it now. I've felt it, throughout, and I think that's a good thing, because I think it's not something that stays. I don't stay like, oh, I'm not supposed to be here, but yeah, I mean, that's anybody I think is going to find themselves in that when they're trying to do something hard and trying to break in. I mean, you're always trying to break into a room that you haven't been in before, right? And so it's that unknown of like, am I good enough to go into that room? Do I have enough experience? Am I ever going to get into that room? And the answer is yes. I mean, because that's the entire timeline of my career, and most people that are in brokerage's career. You look back and you're like, I would have never thought I would be in all these different rooms and have this success, or be on podcasts now with people, and people wanting to listen to what I have to say. And if you're not feeling a little bit of imposter syndrome, you're not where you're supposed to be, I don't think.
Yeah, so with imposter syndrome, it's such an interesting thing because it cripples a lot of people. The imposter syndrome, if you actually genuinely believe that you are an imposter, then good luck growing, and you don't. And there's people like you, like us, I can attest on behalf of my brother, like we embrace it. Every time we feel it, we're finally getting to where we need to be. That room that's making us feel very uncomfortable, that is exactly where we need to be, not in this other place.
Right. And then you engulf that room. You become that, the normal guy in that room. You don't want to be there anymore. That's not where you're supposed to be anymore. You got to go find the next one, right? And that's that kind of like, you have to be an imposter. You have to continue to put yourself in uncomfortable scenarios to grow and to figure it out, right? Because if you're not learning, you're not growing. I mean, people that need a high level of stimulation, I'm sure you can tell that's me. You got to go do something different, right? If you're doing the same thing, running in the same place, it's like, this isn't even fun. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to have to go find another career. So you have to, it's that excitement, right? I mean, it's like this, maybe it's maniacal, but it's like, I love it. I love the challenge. I love, trying to figure out problems and like advance, on the board of life and in this profession. And, it's certainly not easy, but I think like, you maybe hear 100 or 1,000 no's, and then you finally, what's that? There's a meme, right, of the guy like mining underground,
Yeah.
and there's the wall, and there's the treasure on the other side, and you got to kind of remember that, right? You're almost there. You're always almost there. You just got to keep going, and I think that's the fun in it, right? If it was just like if it was all just great all the time, it would not be exciting. And I think it's that's life. That's this profession. That's any profession. It's you got to take the good with the bad, and you suffer, right? You gotta like you have to sort of want to suffer and maybe not enjoy it, but be able to tolerate it, right? In order to enjoy the success, and then want to get right back in that deep end and suffer some more. And I
Yeah,
think, I enjoy it. Maybe I'm a little crazy in that respect, but I just, you want to keep challenging yourself, and you want to, keep building. So, it's fun.
I think it also comes back from your sports background, right? You play lacrosse. I'm actually going through that with my son. So he loves winning. He's 6 years old, just turned 6, and he loves winning more than he loves challenging himself. And I keep pushing him to the older group in his sports, so that, and he's like, he hates it because anytime he bumps up to the older group, he's the worst, right? And he's 6, and now he's in a group from 7 to 12 year olds, and he's like, he's being pushed around. He's the smallest, he's the slowest, and I'm trying to tell him, like, it's not about winning in the beginning, it's about getting better, right? Like I mentioned, you got to be in that next room where
If he could figure that out at 6, you're dad of the year. You might be dad of the generation, because I think like most people will never. I mean, most people never figure that out or put in that situation. And I don't know that I can say that I was great at it like when I was younger. Like I'm sure I could have been much better at it, but like that's like such a good scenario to be in, right? Is because I mean, you look back and you realize everything you suffered, right, got you to where you were, and allowed you to be successful in the room that you're in. I mean, I think a lot of people that everything's just kind of cut out for them, or everything's kind of easy. As soon as you get a little bit of friction in life, or in professional world, or in your relationship, or whatever, it's like it's world shattering, right? And it's very hard to compartmentalize that. And I think, my life has definitely not been cookie cutter. I'm sure that, there's lots of twists and turns that, but it's, it's, yeah, I think it probably, has allowed me to, kind of deal with, failure, or go out and want to do really, really big things. And if they don't work out, you know, it sucks in the moment, and it might suck the next day, but it's like I can either stay here and pout, or I'm gonna go try to figure something else out. And I'm the only one that can pull myself out of this,
exactly.
and that's, I think, a quality of a lot of people in life. So good on you for putting them in the deep end, stay in the deep end. And
Yeah.
maybe he'll be, carrying a World Cup trophy one day.
Maybe I always, like, I tell him, like, one thing that I've always told him, and I have 3 kids, is like, it doesn't matter to me what they do, right? Whether it's athletics, academics, finance, it doesn't really, like, you need to do it 100%, right? Like you said, like, you mentioned before, you don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing doing everything 100%. I truly believe it is, right? Otherwise, it's a waste of time. You're not giving yourself a chance to succeed by not giving it 100%. So whatever you choose, whether it's real estate, finance, you want to play a sport, whatever the case is, put it to the limit. And if you don't succeed, you can look back at your life and say, I did everything I could have, and it's okay that I didn't succeed in that.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, it's really easy to do that when you really like what you do. Because it's like, and I think that's, again, I'm really lucky to be in this kind of like, it's competitive. It's gratification. It's very autonomous. You're figuring out, there's always something new to figure out. But like, I know that if I didn't like this as much, I wouldn't, want to come in and suffer and work really hard, as hard, or just, I mean, I'm sure if you ask people around me, I'm crazy about everything that we're doing. I'm like, want to see every detail. I want to see every, color in this piece of advertising. You know what I mean? It's like, and not everything has to be perfect, right? Because then you start to, like, waste time. But I really
Right.
care about everything that we're doing. And I don't know. I mean, there's certainly different things in my life that I have, but it's like, this is, you find yourself very lucky to be in something that you care so much about, and that you can come in and work so hard at, because most people just go to work, right? And they,
Yep.
get a paycheck, and they, oh, I got to go to work again the next day. Like, I'm like, well, I got another day where I can go, make a list of things that we can go tackle. And like, I love it, and I think I'm lucky, so I do try to think
Absolutely.
about that too. It's
it keeps life very colorful. when you
Yeah.
have that, because you're always just going to the next chapter of the book. It doesn't get stale. I
No.
see oftentimes people just do the same thing over and over without any kind of intention to grow, and they're unhappy. And what's even worse than anything, they don't even know what's causing their unhappiness. They're just in this complacent.
Right. And that leads to regret, and then you regret, right, your life. Like I know that, whether, if everything goes right in this business and one day, real estate brokerage goes away or what for whatever reason, I got to go do something else. Like I will never regret, the work, the path and the things I've learned and just the people I've been able to meet, right? I mean, I've gotten to meet so many cool people and prolific people both in real estate and in the industry that I serve and it's like it's just crazy, and I think, I think, yeah, I mean, I'm lucky and I love it. And I love to come in and run as hard and as fast as I can with good form.
For sure. And speaking of industry, the automotive industry is going through massive changes. You have electric vehicles, consolidations, shifts in consumer behavior. How is that, if at all, underwriting the way you structure deals today? Are you seeing groups approach their real estate strategy differently with all these shifts in place?
Yeah, I mean, you got the EV thing that was rolled out by the previous administration, and I will certainly not get political, but I think that that was premature to really the capacity at which infrastructure could serve, that amount of electric vehicles. I think, look, I'm a market guy, right? If the market wants electric vehicles, the manufacturer is going to make more electric vehicles. Dealers will want to sell them, right? The market doesn't want that level of electric vehicles yet. Maybe they will, but like, I have no preference, right? And I think dealers are the same way. Anyone that's, in a business, um, is driven by the market, it's driven by demand, right? And I think demand was not there when they tried to roll out all these EV mandates and CapEx mandates on the dealerships to, be able to have the capacity for electric vehicles. I think, I hear about it the most actually from the investor market, the institutional investors about EVs and are the dealerships, being up to EV. And I think that's really all rolled back. Obviously, this administration is not as pro EV as the previous. And so, I think it's just, I don't think it changes that much. I think, there were physical, material changes that a lot of dealerships had to go through to, from, $250,000 to, $1.5 million. But, I don't think it changes that much. I think, if for whatever reason, we go to a much more, if we are dominant EV market, you will see a service component change in the dealerships because the EVs don't need as much service. I mean, they're basically a skateboard with a battery and wheels, right? They don't have, all these moving parts in an engine. You'll see tires. Tires, I know, wear down much quicker. So tires, would be, need to be more plentiful. And I would imagine higher demand on the aggregate. But I mean, you'd see a service component change. I mean, they're basically just big computers, right, with a battery. And I think you'll see, that those components change. But right now, I think the market wants, a blend of electric vehicles, hybrids, but internal combustion engines. I think, the infrastructure that we have as far as, gas. Gas and the capacity for gas cars to get where people need and the convenience of that. Like, if you charge your Tesla and you runs out of battery after 200 miles or whatever, and you can't go charge it, or the charging station is going to charge, for it's going to take 3 hours. Like, I mean, people nowadays are all about convenience, right, and time. And if that is going to be the reality, people just aren't going to want EVs. And I would imagine that's not going to be forever, right? We're going to figure out more of an efficient way to run that. But people just, I mean, they're not patient. People are not patient nowadays. I think more than ever, we need to get to where we're going, and we're, quickly on to the next thing. And so right now, I mean, I don't think much has changed. I think, internal combustion vehicles are, in full effect. I think, we're not seeing as much push from the EV, infrastructure mandates. So I think, things are kind of where they were. That may change, obviously. But I think we're kind of in the same place.
So I know you mentioned that you've had, that quote that came internally from your company of a guy who said, it's not so much how fast you run, you just have to have good form. You already run fast, you just need to improve your form. Like, did you have a similar type influence by any client that you worked with that really changed the way like you see the industry?
Yeah, I've had a few that helped me. I don't know if it was so much the like relative to that quote, but I think that I've had the real pleasure of um, connecting with clients that were, very influential to other client relationships that I now have, and they didn't, necessarily have to do that. I mean, you always want a testimonial, you always want clients to be, happy with the work that you do, but really being a proponent for you and your business and to other people in the industry is huge, and it's something I definitely have. I think and beyond that, this industry is so it's so great. I think it's such a people and culture oriented industry. I do a lot of work. I mean, I'm in the real estate space, obviously, but most of my work is building relationships and educating people in the automotive industry, not the real estate industry. I mean, the funds, that we work with, yes, but most of my time is spent, I was on a podcast on Monday that'll come out with a automotive publication. I go to conferences with different people in automotive finance or automotive law or the big dealership conference every year is NADA. I have an opportunity to speak at another, sort of finance, automotive conference at the end of the year. I'll be, speaking at a equipment conference next week. A lot of it is like, it's relationships with the industry. It's not so much. I think accountants, who had big books of business and put me onto their entire network, right? And we're big. Here's the way this kind of works, Ned. Let me teach you. The politic of in the relationships. Attorneys that help me do that, and figuring out where the politic and where the pieces of the board are. That was, I think, even bigger for me than yet. Than maybe some of the clients that I've had. I've had great clients, all of them, and they continue to be. But I think sort of the people that are already in the circle of the accountants, the attorneys, the M&A guys. Those people that kind of move and shake and know everyone that I will ever want to work with, and know all the movements of the space and kind of are ahead of things. That integration to that circle and that continued integration to that circle has been, I think, the most profound to my business, because you really see what goes on. You're able to really develop relationships with those people that have gained the trust of the people that you want to work with, and you really kind of become part of the ecosystem. A year or two ago, I kind of had this idea that the way that I think this is going to work, because it's so that there wasn't a path laid out, right? I'm building this path, is I need to go build relationships with the people that are in the game, that are moving and shaking, whether it's the accountants or the attorneys, the M&A guys. One, I need to learn, what they know, because it will help me in my, business with these clients and understanding what their needs are and how they're motivated. But two, they already have the relationships, right? And if I can be, add value to them, I do a tremendous amount of referral work to these people. But if I can add value to them and be, have a relationship with them, you're part of the ecosystem now, right? And you can offer something unique and real estate, capital markets and advisory that isn't being serviced. And it was just like a light bulb moment for me. And so I mapped out the entire, ecosystem that I felt exists in this space between M&A and investment banking, attorneys, accountants, all of that. And I really sought out, and I still do, try to seek out and develop relationships with these people. Not genuine relationships, friends. I mean, I would call them, friends a lot, most of them. And, we see each other at conferences. We visit and eat dinner and get drinks and go to events, when they're in New York or I'm in their respective cities. And, that's, I think, the coolest way to do business. Is really become, part of a community and a culture. You have to execute. You have to do what you say you're going to do. You have to do it, the best. But when you can kind of do business like a person versus a robot that's out transacting, that's cool. And I think that's really what resonates with people. I mean, we're all people. And again, I think I'm blessed or lucky to have been good with people, like just ever since I was a young guy. And that's what Glenn, I think, really emphasized and has done with his business. And he's an excellent people person, and he has relationships with his clients that last beyond 20 years. And I think that's really what you want to build, right? And I think that's what you said, that kind of balance of contentness, and if you can kind of make your life and your business similar and kind of follow a similar track and integrate them to where you're again, you're not like a robot walking around transacting. That's, I think, really cool. And I'm very much still building that and figuring that out and developing myself and this business within that ecosystem. But that is the way I think you achieve that, is really kind of making your clients, the people in your space, your friends, and knowing them on a personal level and going deeper than just the business.
This whole time, we're having this we're having this conversation and we're speaking about relationships and everything else. I think it would be a very good idea for me to introduce you to a buddy of mine. You guys have so much in common. You guys are the same age. You are in the automotive industry on the real estate side. He's on the operator ownership side, and you guys have matching protects. So we should, we're going to be in New York late August. We should definitely do a dinner. I think he's somebody who's very ambitious. Just a matter of time before he gets to 15 dealerships from, I think, 7 or 8 that his family has. So definitely somebody I think you guys, I think will get along very well.
Yeah, I love it, man. That's like the fun of it too. Like you meet so many, like I meet so many people too in what I do, venture capitalists or bankers, and I'm always thinking of my friends and who I know. And hey, I talked to this guy the other day. Like I don't know that he and I can do a ton of business, but I think he'd be really good for your business. Like you should call him. You have some buddies that will follow up and call those people, and some that won't. But that's a cool thing. I think you get to meet so many people, and it's so. I mean, you look back and you realize like I could go do so many things, right? I know tons of people in private equity and venture capital and the automotive dealership space, the M&A space. Like if I needed to, an answer to something for a client or for myself, I've got almost anybody I could call and get an answer to anything. And I think that's cool too. Like what you just mentioned. Like I hopped on your podcast, and it's an absolute pleasure to be on here. And I thank you for having me. And maybe we'll make a connection and do some business. And if not, maybe we'll, have a relationship, be able to help one another and in some kind of way. And I think that's the way that I think it's cool to do this business. It's not, hey, we sold, X billion dollars worth of deals over X properties and, look at us. It's like, that's paper thin. And so
Ned, what do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? Like, how do you see? I mean, you seem like you're doing everything right in this industry.
I don't think I'm doing everything right. I'm doing everything. I'm trying as best I can. I'm sure there's things that I could be doing a lot better. But 5 to 10 years, I don't know. I don't. It's hard for me to think that far. I mean, I obviously have a plan. I hope that hopefully I'm staying alive here in New York City. But I think
about a different time.
yeah, easier said than done. I don't know. It's hard for me to think that far. Hopefully this business has grown. We've grown it, to into, a multi, much bigger in terms of team and how it's, being serviced. It's hard for me to think that far. I think very much more short term. I think, if you get caught, if you pick a place down the road that is, I think that's just hard for me because like life in this business has always been so dynamic, right? Where I thought I wanted to be a year ago is not where I am now, but I'm very glad I am where I'm where I'm supposed to be now, and I probably wouldn't have been where I was supposed to be a year from now, or a year ago, and had I set out my sights on something, and so I try to make shorter term goals. I try to kind of look at things, where can we grow the business, in terms of exposure, in terms of clients, in terms of people, that work within us, in terms of different events and organizations that we're a part of, and what impact we're having there, and then servicing that and seeing where that goes. I think like, obviously I don't want it to all crash and burn, but I think it's hard for me to say like I want to be here in 5 years or here in 10 years, because I have there's no way for me to like paint that picture 5 years from now and follow that. I think things are they change so fast, right? And technology changes so fast. And I mean, 2 years ago I was in Charlotte, now I live in New York City. I mean, things like that. It's hard for me to do that, and maybe that's wrong, or maybe it's right. It's the way that I like to think about it. I like to think very short term. I like to map the business out. What exists in the world of my business, right? In terms of people and relationships, I can grow in this direction. Conferences, media. We should be writing more and being more thought leadership, going on podcasts. So that's how I think about it, and then just trying to grow outward in those directions, and then maintain and lay a foundation every time we grow, so that we're not falling from the top that we achieve all the way back down. You got to lay foundation. But that's how I do it. I'm running around. I'm doing so many different things all at once. I probably look like a crazy person half the time, but I don't even think that far. I think it would almost overwhelm me.
No, I don't think there's a right or a wrong here. I think it's whatever works for you. Some people like to build that foresight. They're saying, okay, I'm on the broker side. I want to get on the principal side in the future.
Yeah, definitely want to get on the principal side. We've got, opportunities to do that. Hopefully we've closed, 10, $20 billion worth of deals in 5 or 10 years. I think it's possible. I always set like extremely high goals. I think people look at me a little funny, because, we may not always hit these super high benchmarks, but we'll get really close. And if we land like in the 70th or 80th percentile, we did really, really, really good. And I think, that's how I like to set, goals and things like that on an annual basis. So, I don't know. I think that, given the trajectory to this point, and the trajectory, so long as we continue to work and run and work as a team and grow, like this will go. I mean, we're dictating this space, in commercial real estate, which is a crazy thought. Like the potential is so much. So I don't know. I don't want to get. I think setting expectations too is kind of, you want to have expectations for yourself to a degree and standards, but setting expectations and then not hitting them can be just detrimental. And so I think it's just run really hard and really fast and with really good form, and like see where you go. And like, life, destiny or whatever it is has a way of taking you where you're supposed to be. And I think I won't have any regrets if I just continue to work really hard and grow with a team, and like watch other people around me succeed, right? That's a really cool thing. And achieve, money and careers in this business. But if I do that, I'm happy. I know that like, there'll be no shortage of capital and itch that has been scratched in terms of passion and for business. I think it's just what's the next thing? I think it's exciting. I don't want to say here's where I want to be and paint this picture, and if I don't get there, because that might not be where I'm supposed to be. So
Absolutely. Ned, it was an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you.
We know a few people who do sell and lease back, never somebody who's in the automotive industry. So we learned a lot from you. I'm sure the people watching this podcast, and I'm very confident our relationship is going to go beyond these hour and a half that we just had together. And I am going to set up that dinner. Let's see. I hope you're available at that time. I'll ask him as well. I think it'll be something. I think it'll be very valuable for you to meet a principal and somebody who's like your age, right? Somebody who has all the ambition in the world to grow. I think you feed off of people like that. You'll feed off of him, and he'll feed off of you, and we'll feed off of both of you guys.
Yeah. No, you guys are great, man. And this is an awesome platform that you have, and what you guys do professionally. And I love stuff like this. I think it's cool to get out and like, tell, it's not about being perfect and saying everything about, your career has been perfect. It's about, saying like, this is, my path and this was, honestly how I got into this. And, we've done pretty good. So I think, it's, there's something to be said about that. And, we're growing this and I think it's cool, man. I really appreciate this opportunity. This is one of the more like personal, I think, podcasts I've done. So I thought it was really cool. And no, you guys are great. I think what you guys do is awesome, and keep doing it. I look forward to building, our relationship beyond this, and maybe we can do some more of these.
Yeah,
Of course.
absolutely. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank
All
you.
right. Have a good one. Have a good day.